Hey everybody, Pastor Greg here, and I've got a great friend as we are chatting about, we're in a series called Let's Chat About, and we're going to chat about mental health. And so I could think of nobody better than to sit with my friend Adam Mason, who's been with us a long, long time. Adam, tell us what you do and how long you've been here at the church and just a little bit about you.
Well, thank you, Pastor Greg. I've had the privilege of being the minister of counseling services here at the church for a little over 25 years. In my role here, I oversee all things counseling related across the different campuses of Houston's First Baptist Church, including running the premarital counseling program, the First Job Hope Ministry, as well as the Juliana Poor Memorial Counseling Center.
You got a big job and you do a great job. So
Thank you.
let's jump in these little episodes we're doing here to talk about mental health. And I've just got some questions for you that I'd love to ask you and just get your wisdom. And I know this will be a blessing to all of you to be able to listen in as well.
So these questions are all about a friend of yours, right?
These are all about a friend of mine. Yeah, that's right. Somebody I heard. I have no bearing in any of these. That's right. You probably hear that a lot in counseling, don't you?
I have a friend.
I have a friend, and he was wondering. So the first little section that I want us to talk about is the what and why of mental health. And we hear about mental health all the time now. And why has it become such a pervasive topic in these last few years? I don't know how many years, but it just seems like we hear about it all the time now. What's going on? Why are we hearing about this so much?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons why. The reason that comes to the surface, the most common, as we're seeing frequently blamed for about everything in our society, is social media. That anytime someone has an issue with drugs and goes into rehab, anytime someone has a suicide attempt, anyone has a breakdown on television or in a rehearsal, some place in public that maybe it's recorded, it is halfway across the world in 30 minutes because of social media. But when we break it down really into something that's much deeper than that, more pervasive, is there something about the depravity of man that loves misery in other people? You know, the old saying, misery loves company. And so when we hear something about a mental health crisis, a mental health breakdown, a mental health struggle, there's something within us that wants to hear about that and then to share that with someone else. And through social media, through the news, through the tremendous ability that we have to stay connected now across the world, that information is able to travel almost instantaneously. So we find out about it, we want to share it, we want to show that we're the one that has the knowledge of the information, because there's a power, there's a prestige, there's a respect we feel like we get when we're able to be the one to share that news, and the glory that someone else might be doing a little worse than what I'm doing.
Do you think there's more people struggling with it nowadays, or it's just we hear about it more?
Well, just based on the sheer population, the numbers are higher. When we look at the percentage of the population, we're seeing that percentage increase as well. And most people equate the higher percentage now to the shift to urban dwelling.
Sure, yeah, there's so many people around each other and so many other stressors.
The concrete jungle.
Yeah.
We find that as man separates himself from nature, so he separates himself from God.
Wow, that's good. That's why a lot of times people say, well, I feel so close to God in the mountains, or I feel so close to God at the beach. And we're not pantheists that we think that God is the beach or God is the mountains or he's only there, but the creator is easily seen in the creation. And I can see that. How do you feel about it? Almost, and I mean this with no disrespect to anybody at all, it's almost cool to say I struggle with anxiety or I struggle with depression. Do you think people are overstating it, or you think they're finally becoming real about it?
I think that's tied to man's quest for identity and for significance. Each of us seeks to be known based on something unique about our character or something unique about our identity. And when we don't embrace the identity that God gives us, then we need something else to make us special, to make us stand out. And if we're not attractive enough or physically fit enough or academic enough, or we're not able to fit into the mainstream with a certain amount of significance the way that we are, then we try to find those things that are less acceptable to stand out. And It's like seeking negative attention. A child will crave some form of attention, and in the absence of positive attention, will seek negative attention. So I can get attention from dressing all black and wearing black makeup, or I can get attention from multiple piercings, or I can get attention by being the depressed one or the one who struggles with anxiety. It's a way of trying to feel a sense of worth or significance separate from our identity in Christ.
Wow. Yeah. And it can still be a real issue. We're not
Absolutely.
negating the issue by any means, but the conversation about it sometimes can become almost a promotion of it.
Right.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. All of us feel nervous at times. All of us feel anxious at times. It's a part of the human experience. How is that different than struggling with anxiety? If somebody's going to stand up in front of the classroom and give a speech, they're going to be nervous.
Sure.
Or do something that they haven't done before. But I think it seems like sometimes we push all these things together when we are anxious. We are nervous at times as humans. That's okay. But that's not the same as anxiety, depression, and the true struggles with it. So how would you speak to that of people knowing when there really is something that's a disorder, so to speak, if that's the right way to put it, compared to just the normal human experience?
Yeah. The vast majority of symptoms that are part of the diagnostic criteria for different mental health disorders are actually behaviors that occur all throughout the normal population. What we're looking for is behavior that occurs with an intensity, with an interval, with a duration that is so far beyond the norm that it creates a significant distress for the individual or for the ones supporting the individual. At that point, we say that's an illness, not because of the actual behavior itself, but again, because of the frequency, the duration, the intensity of the behavior.
It's almost like a river. There's a difference in a river flowing and flooding. And we've all got a flow. That the river's going to flow in life, but there's a difference when it moves to a flood and it begins to be destructive.
Every one of us should struggle with anxiety, depression, an elevated mania that seems to be very enduring and doesn't come down from it for a period of time. We frequently would call that a mountaintop experience. We should all experience those, but there should be a variety within the human experience versus that being the primary state where we are the majority of the time.
Yes, that's great. That's great. How would you define mental health? I mean, these terms that we all throw around as lay people, so to speak, of mental health and anxiety and depression and such. Give us some handles for those things. What's your definition of some of those things?
I would say it's the ability to which we can perceive, interact, and process the world and relationships around us without creating an unusual and unreasonable amount of distress.
That's great. That's really good. Well, this is so good. Well, I want to ask this last question. We're going to do this at every one of our episodes here that we have. How can Jesus help? And we're talking about the what and the why of mental health. Just how would you say Jesus can help us in that?
Well, Greg, I think that's a wonderful question, and it's a question I would expect my pastor to ask.
Very pastoral question.
A very pastoral question for that perspective. But at the same time, it's a very real question. There's a tendency we have to separate the mental and physical and emotional world from the spiritual world. And in reality, they can't be separated. They're all so integrated. You can't pull them apart. And when we look at the majority of struggles, now, you made a comment earlier that we're not minimizing mental illness. So we can say that as a caveat. There are a certain number of mental illnesses that are organic or biological in nature. Many of those have a genetic predetermining factor that's a cause of that. So we're not speaking in terms of those. We know that that level of illness, like all diseases, entered the world because of the fall. And it's present because of general sin, not because of individuals' responses to that. But apart from those chemical disorders, those biological disorders, if we're looking at the other mental disorders, the vast majority of the clients that come into the counseling center, we could trace those issues back to a struggle with their sense of identity, security, and worth. And identity is really the cornerstone of that. When we reject our identity in Christ, when we look at that identity and say that who Christ made me to be, who God made me to be in the image of Christ is insufficient, it's not special enough. And I turn from that and try to seek an identity that's based in something else, then we have not just lost our identity, we've lost our sense of security and our sense of worth as well. And then the world around us becomes our source. It becomes the target, and it can never supply those things to us in a way that is satisfying. And so when we look at the role of our relationship with Jesus, without that relationship with God through his Son, Jesus, we can never fully appreciate our identity in Christ. We can never find that sense of identity and security and worth that is meant for us as image bearers. So it's the crucial beginning place for a healthy mental and emotional and physical and spiritual processing.
That's great. That's so good. Say those three words again: identity,
Security, and worth.
Identity, security, and worth. And those.
And if you just think about that, we think about identity, we hear people say, I've got to go find myself. There's clearly a lack of identity. And so people who struggle with that lack of identity, and that's one of the areas that Satan loves to target. It's where he targeted Adam and Eve in the Bible. That's where Satan's struggle was. He says, I want to be like God. It's not, my identity as being third in command is not enough. You know, I want to elevate myself. So when you have that struggle with identity, that initial spiritual attack, there's a sense of lostness that follows that, which is that depression that we see so common among people, not having that clear sense of where they are. And when people have a struggle in the area of security, then that's where we see that anxiety and that fear come in. You know, am I going to be okay? And then when you see people who struggle with a sense of worth, then that's where that sense of shame or defectiveness or something wrong with me, do I have anything to add? And so many of the struggles have that nucleus of struggling with identity and security and worth that then grows into a multitude of mental disorders from that, all coming back to that cornerstone of our identity in Christ.
That's great. Thank you so much. Well, you can tell Adam's got a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience with this. And talking about the what and the why of mental health, our next episode here that we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is going on inside of us, what's happening in us spiritually and physically. So I hope you'll click on to the next one and keep watching as we have more things to share with you. Hey, thanks for watching. To find out more about Houston's First, you can subscribe to our channel or you can go to houstonsfirst.org.